The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called at 0400 Standard Galactic Time, though time meant little when panic rippled through 17 different species' communication networks simultaneously. Ambassador Chen Wei stood at the human delegation's modest podium, her dark eyes scanning the massive amphitheater that housed representatives from across known space. The Zephyrian delegation, their translucent blue forms shimmering with nervous energy, huddled in their atmospheric bubble while shooting suspicious glances at the Korthak War Council across the chamber. The insectoid Threnari clicked and buzzed in their mechanical harmony, but their usual precise coordination seemed fractured. Even the massive Vrax, whose stone-like exteriors typically projected unwavering confidence, shifted uncomfortably in their reinforced seating. "The Outer Rim monitoring stations have gone silent," announced High Counselor Vextar, the ancient crystalline whose faceted form reflected the chamber's lights in prismatic patterns. 17 systems. No distress signals. No evidence of conflict. They simply stopped. Chen had seen panic before in her 20 years of diplomatic service, but this felt different. These weren't individual species facing isolated threats. This was the collective fear of civilizations that had stood for millennia suddenly confronting the unknown. "What assets do we have in the affected regions?" asked Commander Theclon of the Korthak military caste, his scarred carapace bearing the marks of countless battles. Despite his species' reputation for aggression, Chen noticed the slight tremor in his secondary arms, a tell she'd learned to read during trade negotiations. The Zephyrian long-range scouts were scheduled to patrol sectors 7 through 12. Vextar replied, the crystalline being's voice carrying harmonics that translated into pure information. None have reported back. Immediately, the Korthak delegation erupted in their guttural battle language. Chen's translator provided the general meaning: accusations of Zephyrian incompetence, suggestions of conspiracy, demands for accountability. The Zephyrian response came as a cascade of prismatic light patterns that filled their atmospheric dome. Even without translation, the defensive posture was obvious. Within seconds, other delegations began taking sides, ancient alliances and older grudges surfacing like festering wounds. "Perhaps," Chen said quietly into her microphone, "we should focus on what we know rather than what we suspect." The chamber's acoustics carried her words clearly, but the effect was immediate silence. Hundreds of eyes, optical sensors, and various sensory organs turned toward the human delegation. In the 3 standard years since humanity had been granted council membership, they had rarely spoken during crisis sessions, preferring to observe and learn. "The human delegation recognizes the gravity of our situation," Vextar announced formally. "Ambassador Chen, please share your observations." Chen stood slowly, feeling the weight of attention from beings whose civilizations had been exploring space when humanity was still discovering fire. "We've reviewed the last transmissions from all 17 stations. The timing of the communication blackouts follows a pattern, roughly 6 standard hours between each station going dark, moving in a straight line through space." She gestured, and her aide activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. Star maps appeared, showing the affected systems with timeline markers. "Whatever caused this is moving deliberately, following a specific route. It's not random system failures or natural phenomena. Something is advancing toward the core systems, and it's doing so with purpose." The mathematical precision of the pattern was undeniable. The chamber buzzed with translated conversations as species processed the implications. "The human assessment appears accurate," admitted Theclon, though his tone suggested reluctance to agree. "What do they propose we do with this information?" Chen had expected this question. It was always the same. Acknowledge human insight, then immediately question human capability. "We propose sending a joint reconnaissance mission to the last known position of the advancing entity. Gather intelligence before it reaches more populated systems." "A joint mission?" The question came from Princess Nala of the Velani Consortium, her serpentine form coiled elegantly around her delegation's speaking platform. "Which species would you suggest lead such a critical operation?" And there it was, the fundamental problem that had plagued the Galactic Council since its formation. Every species trusted their own military doctrine, their own technology, their own strategic thinking. But when crisis demanded cooperation, that same confidence transformed into suspicion of everyone else's capabilities. "The Korthak possess the most advanced weapons systems," Chen acknowledged. "The Zephyrian scouts have unmatched speed and stealth capabilities. The crystalline computational networks can process tactical data faster than any other species. The Threnari coordination protocols are flawless for large-scale operations." She paused, letting her words settle. Each of our species brings unique strengths. The question isn't who should lead, it's how we combine those strengths effectively. Spoken like someone whose species has contributed little to galactic defense, muttered Subcommander Grix of the Thrinari Hive Cluster, his mandibles clicking with dismissive rhythm. The comment sparked immediate reaction. The Villani delegation hissed their disapproval. They had recently negotiated favorable trade agreements with humanity. The Zephyrians pulsed with conflicted light patterns, clearly torn between diplomatic courtesy and underlying agreement. Actually, said Captain Rodriguez from the Human Military Advisory position, our species has been analyzing the tactical doctrines of every council member since we joined. We've identified some interesting patterns. Rodriguez activated his own display, showing comparative military engagement data. The Korthak win 93% of direct confrontations but struggle with extended sieges. Zephyrian hit-and-run tactics are devastatingly effective against isolated targets, but less successful against coordinated defenses. Crystalline computational warfare can predict and counter most strategic approaches, except those based on seemingly irrational decision-making. The data was comprehensive, clearly the result of extensive study. But more than that, it was presented without judgment. Simply observe patterns, acknowledge strengths, and limitations. The point, Rodriguez continued, is that every military doctrine succeeds in specific circumstances and struggles in others. Whatever we're facing has already demonstrated the ability to neutralize 17 monitoring stations without triggering their automated distress systems. That suggests either overwhelming force or tactics none of us have encountered before. High Counselor Vextar's crystalline form refracted light in contemplative patterns. The human assessment suggests that our traditional approaches may be insufficient. What alternative do they propose? Chen exchanged glances with Rodriguez. They discussed this possibility during the emergency briefing, though neither had expected to present it so soon. Combined arms doctrine, Chen said simply. Each species contributes their strengths while others cover their weaknesses. Korthak firepower supported by Zephyrian reconnaissance, crystalline tactical coordination enhanced by Thrinari operational precision, all guided by adaptive strategy rather than rigid doctrine. And who, asked Princess Nala with obvious skepticism, would coordinate such a diverse force? Each of our species has different command structures, different tactical philosophies, different definitions of acceptable risk. That's where humans come in, Rodriguez answered. Our military history is built on exactly this kind of cooperation. We've fought alongside allies, integrated diverse tactics, adapted to technologies and strategies we didn't fully understand. Our doctrine isn't based on superiority in any single area. It's based on making the best use of whatever resources are available. The chamber erupted in discussion. Some species saw the logic in the human proposal. Others questioned whether a species with only 3 years of galactic experience could coordinate forces they'd never fought alongside. Still others worried about setting precedents that might challenge established military hierarchies. This debate is premature, declared General Zorek of the Hegemony Defense Forces, his massive form casting shadows across several smaller delegations. We don't yet know what we're facing. Perhaps the threat has already moved on. Perhaps it was never a threat at all. Before anyone could respond, the chamber's emergency communication systems activated. The voice that emerged was strained, speaking in the formal dialect used for critical military reports. Galactic Council, this is Station Commander Velnox at Kepler Monitoring Outpost. We have multiple unidentified contacts approaching our position. They're not responding to communication attempts, and their energy signatures don't match any known species in the database. The transmission crackled with interference, but the next words came through clearly. They're massive. Larger than anything in our tactical databases. And there are dozens of them. The signal cut to static. In the sudden silence, Chen noticed something remarkable. The species that had been arguing moments before were now looking at each other with a different kind of attention. Not suspicion, but assessment. Not doubt, but calculation. The Korthak were evaluating Zephyrian stealth capabilities. The Crystallines were analyzing Thrinari coordination protocols. The Velani were considering how their diplomatic networks might support military intelligence. And slowly, inevitably, their attention turned to the humans. The joint reconnaissance mission, said High Counselor Vextar, will require immediate authorization. Given the urgency of our situation, standard committee review processes are insufficient. Chen understood the implication. In crisis, the Council could authorize emergency operations with limited oversight. But such operations required unanimous consent from all participating species. The Crystalline Collective supports the human proposal, Vextar announced, surprising many in the chamber. The Korthak War Council finds the tactical logic sound, added Declan, though his tone suggested personal reservations. The Zephyrian flotilla acknowledges the necessity, came the harmonic response from their delegation. One by one, each species offered their consent. Some enthusiastic, others reluctant, all recognizing that their traditional approaches to crisis management had been rendered obsolete by circumstances they didn't yet understand. Very well, Chen said, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. We'll need to move quickly. How soon can each delegation provide military assets for the reconnaissance mission? Korthak Heavy Cruiser Squadron can launch in 6 standard hours, Theclon reported. Zephyrian Scout Flotilla is ready for immediate deployment, came the prismatic response. Crystalline computational arrays are already analyzing optimal approach vectors, Vextar added. Threnari coordination vessels await departure authorization, clicked the insectoid chorus. Chen nodded, then asked the question that had been weighing on her mind since the proposal was accepted. And human forces? The UNSC determination is currently in system, Rodriguez answered. She's not the newest ship in our fleet, but she was specifically designed for cooperative operations. Her command systems can interface with any known galactic technology. One ship? Princess Nola's tone carried obvious surprise. For a mission of this importance? One ship with a crew trained specifically for this kind of operation, Chen clarified. We're not bringing numbers to this fight. We're bringing experience in making different approaches work together. The chamber buzzed with translated conversations. The concept was foreign to most species, the idea that a single vessel might coordinate multiple fleets rather than leading them through superior firepower or technology. There is precedent, observed Vextar thoughtfully. Ancient records speak of battles won not through overwhelming force, but through innovative application of diverse capabilities. Ancient records also speak of civilizations that trusted too quickly and fell to deception, cautioned General Zorek. Perhaps, said Chen quietly. But we're not asking anyone to trust blindly. We're asking them to trust results. If our approach proves ineffective, command structure can be reorganized based on mission requirements. It was a reasonable proposal, and reason was something the Galactic Council valued highly. After brief consultations within each delegation, formal authorization was granted. As the chamber began to empty, species representatives hurrying to prepare their forces for deployment, Chen remained at her podium. The magnitude of what they'd just agreed to was settling in. Humanity's first major military operation with galactic allies, facing an unknown threat that had already demonstrated the ability to neutralize sophisticated defenses. Ambassador, Captain Rodriguez approached her position. The Determination's crew is ready for briefing. But I have to ask, are we really prepared for this? Chen looked out at the departing delegates, species that had been viewing each other with suspicion, now coordinating departure schedules and communication protocols. I don't know if anyone's prepared for something like this, Miguel. But I know that separately, each of our species has vulnerabilities. Together, maybe we can cover each other's weaknesses long enough to figure out what we're really dealing with. And if the other species decide human coordination isn't working, then we adapt, Chen answered simply. That's what we do best. As the chamber lights dimmed to accommodate the various species' departure requirements, Chen couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to discover something that would change not just human-alien relations, but the fundamental nature of galactic civilization itself. Whatever was moving through the Outer Rim wasn't just a military threat. It was a test of whether species that had spent centuries doubting each other's motives could learn to rely on each other's strengths. And somehow, against all probability, that test was going to be administered by the newest members of their community, the species that most of them still considered barely capable of interstellar travel. The irony wasn't lost on Chen. In a galaxy where trust was the rarest commodity, they'd just been asked to demonstrate that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their weapons or their technology. It was their absolute refusal to let their allies fight alone. The UNSC Determination was not an impressive ship by galactic standards. At 800 meters length, she was dwarfed by the Korthak heavy cruiser Blood of Ancestors, which stretched nearly 2 kilometers and bristled with plasma cannons capable of cracking planetary surfaces. The crystalline coordination vessel Prismatic Analysis was smaller, but incorporated computing power that could simulate entire stellar systems in real time. Even the elegant Zephyrian scout ships possessed stealth technologies that made them effectively invisible to most sensors. But as Captain Sarah Chen stepped onto the Determination's bridge 12 hours after the council session, she felt a familiar surge of pride in human engineering. Every system on the ship had been designed with one principle in mind: interoperability. The command consoles could interface with 17 different technological standards. The communication arrays could translate not just languages, but entirely different methods of information transfer. The tactical displays could process and correlate data from weapon systems humanity had never built. "Status report," Chen ordered as she settled into the captain's chair. The bridge crew was small but experienced. Each officer had served on joint operations with at least 3 different alien species. "All Allied vessels have reported ready for departure," announced Lieutenant Commander Parks from the communications station. "The Korthak squadron is maintaining formation at 10,000 kilometers. The Zephyrian scouts have already begun advanced reconnaissance sweeps. The crystalline vessel is, well, it's calculating something. What about the Threnari coordination ships? They're requesting detailed tactical protocols for formation flying. Apparently their doctrine requires specific positioning algorithms for multi-species operations." Chen nodded. Each species approached cooperation differently, and successful coordination meant understanding those differences rather than ignoring them. "Forward them our standard flexible formation protocols. Emphasize that positioning will be adjusted based on mission requirements rather than predetermined patterns." "Aye, Captain. Also, we're receiving communication requests from all fleet commanders. They want to discuss command structure before we reach the target system." This Chen had expected. Despite the Council's authorization, none of the military leaders were entirely comfortable with human coordination. Trust in crisis was different from trust in command, especially when that command would determine battle tactics and potentially survival. "Signal all commanders for a joint briefing in 1 hour. Conference Room 3, it has the multi-atmosphere capability." As her crew prepared for departure, Chen reviewed the intelligence package assembled by the combined efforts of all participating species. The information was more detailed than anything humanity had ever worked with, but also more fragmented. Each species had their own intelligence-gathering methods, their own analysis frameworks, their own definitions of threat assessment. The Korthak focused on destructive capability, weapon signatures, armor strength, tactical formations. Their report painted the unknown entities as potentially devastating in direct combat, with energy readings that suggested weapon systems beyond current galactic standards. The Zephyrian analysis concentrated on movement patterns and concealment capabilities. According to their scouts, the entities moved in perfectly coordinated formations but left no detectable exhaust signatures or gravitational disturbances. Whatever propulsion system they used was unlike anything in the galactic database. The crystalline computational models attempted to predict behavior based on observed patterns. Their analysis suggested the entities were following some kind of systematic exploration protocol, but the logic behind their target selection was opaque. They weren't hitting the most strategically valuable systems or the most heavily defended ones. Their choices seemed almost random. The Threnari contribution was perhaps the most unsettling. Their hive mind perspective allowed them to analyze the coordination between the entities in ways individual consciousnesses couldn't fully grasp. According to their report, the entities moved with the kind of perfect synchronization that should only be possible for a true collective intelligence. But their behavior patterns suggested individual decision-making processes. Chen was still studying the conflicting analyses when her aide announced that the Allied commanders had arrived for the briefing. Conference Room 3 had been specifically designed for multi-species meetings with adjustable atmosphere, lighting, and gravitational conditions. As Chen entered, she found herself facing the most diverse group of military leaders ever assembled for a joint human operation. Commander Theclon represented the Korthak, his battle-scarred carapace gleaming under the room's adjusted lighting. His reputation preceded him. Veteran of 12 major campaigns, tactical genius with an unfortunate tendency to solve problems through overwhelming force application. Flight leader Zixana of the Zephyrian flotilla was almost impossible to see clearly, her translucent form shifting through subtle color changes that indicated emotional state. Zephyrian military doctrine emphasized speed, stealth, and precision strikes, concepts that often conflicted with the Korthak preference for direct assault. Coordinate Prime Nilvex represented the crystalline forces, their faceted form refracting the room's light into complex patterns. Crystalline warfare was mathematical, based on probability calculations and optimized resource allocation. They won battles by understanding them completely before they began. The Threnari were represented by a 3-entity coordination cluster, Subprime Kilolax, Tactical Node Veneris, and Dataflow Yexelon. Their decision-making process required constant communication between specialized roles, which often frustrated species that preferred individual command authority. "Thank you all for coming," Chen began, activating the room's translation systems. I know this is an unusual situation for all our forces. Before we discuss tactical approaches, I'd like to address the obvious question. Why are we doing this? Veklan's mandibles clicked, and what Chen had learned was the Korthak equivalent of a skeptical smile. Human optimism is notable, but perhaps premature. We are here because the Council decided cooperation was necessary. Whether such cooperation is actually possible remains to be demonstrated. The Crystalline Collective calculates a 67% probability of mission success under optimal coordination, added Neilvex, their harmonic voice-carrying undertones that translated as cautious assessment. However, coordination variables introduce significant uncertainty into all predictive models. Our hive clusters have never operated with non-collective entities in combat situations, admitted the Threnari Coordination Cluster, their voices overlapping in precise harmony. The concept of individual decision-making during battle creates tactical unpredictability. Zixana's color patterns shifted to deep blue, curiosity mixed with concern in Zephyrian emotional expression. Each species has proven effective in isolation. The question is whether effectiveness can be maintained when combined. Chen had prepared for this conversation, but hearing the doubts expressed directly made the challenge feel more real. These were seasoned military leaders, each representing centuries or millennia of tactical development. None of them had ever faced a situation where success depended on trusting other species' capabilities. "You're all right to be concerned," Chen acknowledged. Human military history is full of examples of alliances that failed because partners couldn't adapt to each other's methods, but it's also full of examples where diverse approaches created capabilities that no single force could achieve. She activated the room's holographic display, showing historical human battles where coalition forces had succeeded against superior opponents. Normandy, 1944, multiple nations with different training, different equipment, different languages, coordinating a massive amphibious assault. Kobani, 2014. Ground forces, air support, and local fighters with completely different tactical doctrines working together against a common enemy. Luna Station, 2157. The first time human forces fought alongside alien allies. The alien commanders studied the tactical displays with professional interest. The examples showed not just successful cooperation, but the evolution of cooperative doctrine under fire. Interesting, the clone rumbled. But these examples show human forces learning to work with other human forces, or humans adapting to single alien partners. We face a different challenge? Do we? Chen asked. What's the fundamental difference between a human paratrooper learning to coordinate with tank crews and a Korthak heavy weapons specialist learning to coordinate with Zephyrian scouts? The difference, said Nelvex thoughtfully, is that humans and human tank crews share the same basic cognitive architecture. Interspecies cooperation requires adapting to entirely different thought processes. That's true, Chen agreed. But it's also an advantage. Your different thought processes mean you see things the rest of us miss. The Korthak identify threats we might overlook. The Zephyrians notice opportunities we wouldn't recognize. The Crystallines calculate possibilities we can't process. The Threnari coordinate complexities we can't manage individually. She paused, letting that sink in. What if our goal isn't to make everyone think alike, but to make different ways of thinking work together? The room fell quiet except for the soft hum of life support systems adjusting for multiple atmospheric requirements. Each commander was processing the concept through their species' particular cognitive framework. Elaborate, requested the Threnari cluster, their voices harmonizing in the pattern that indicated intense collective analysis. Each of you has already identified different aspects of the threat we're facing, Chen explained, calling up the combined intelligence reports. The Korthak see weapons capabilities. The Zephyrians see movement patterns. The Crystallines see behavioral logic. The Threnari see coordination methodologies. Displays showed how each species analysis highlighted different elements of the same data. Separately, each analysis raises more questions than it answers, but together they start to form a more complete picture. A picture of what? Zyxana's color shifted to orange-yellow, puzzlement, mixed with anticipation. Something that uses unknown technology to move in perfect coordination while following logic we don't understand, targeting systems according to criteria we can't identify. Chen highlighted the convergent elements from each species assessment. That's either completely random, or it's operating according to principles none of us recognize individually. The clone leaned forward, his scarred carapace reflecting the holographic display. You suggest that understanding requires all our perspectives combined? I'm suggesting that fighting it might require all our capabilities combined in ways none of us would use individually, Chen answered. What if the reason 17 monitoring stations were neutralized without sending distress signals isn't because they were overwhelmed, but because they were approached in ways their defenses weren't designed to handle? The implications rippled through the room. Each species' military doctrine was built around countering known threats using proven methods. But if they were facing something that operated outside all known parameters, traditional approaches might be fundamentally inadequate. "So how do we prepare for something we can't predict?" asked Neovex, their crystalline form refracting light in patterns that suggested deep contemplation. "We don't prepare for specific scenarios," Chen replied. "We prepare to adapt to whatever we encounter. We set up command structures that can shift based on mission requirements. We establish communication protocols that allow for real-time tactical coordination. We practice responding to unexpected situations." "Practice," repeated the Threnari cluster. "You propose training exercises during transit? I propose that we spend the time learning each other's capabilities and limitations. Not just knowing what each force can do, but understanding how those capabilities can complement each other." Chen activated another display showing the combined fleet formation. "Right now we're flying as separate units that happen to be going to the same place. What if we could operate as a single force with specialized components?" The military applications were obvious to everyone in the room, but the conceptual challenge was enormous. Species that had developed their tactical doctrines in isolation would need to fundamentally rethink their approaches to warfare. "This is unprecedented," Zixana observed, her colors cycling through the spectrum of Zephyrian thoughtfulness. "Yes," Chen agreed. "So is what we're facing. The question is whether we want to meet an unprecedented threat with traditional responses, or whether we're willing to try something equally unprecedented." Veclon's mandibles clicked in a pattern Chen had learned to recognize as grudging respect. "Human tactical philosophy appears to be based on controlled chaos. Introduce so many variables that enemies cannot predict responses." "Not chaos," Chen corrected. "Adaptability. The ability to change approaches when circumstances change. Military doctrine that treats flexibility as a strength rather than a weakness." "The Crystalline Collective finds theoretical merit in this approach," Nilvex admitted. "However, implementation requires trust levels that exceed current interspecies norms." And there it was, the fundamental challenge that had been lurking beneath every discussion. Trust. "You're right," Chen acknowledged. "What I'm proposing requires each species to trust that the others will perform their roles effectively, even when those roles don't match their own tactical preferences. It requires accepting that someone else's approach might be better suited to specific situations. And if that trust proves misplaced?" Veclon's question carried the weight of a military leader responsible for the lives of his forces. "Then people die," Chen answered bluntly. "Just like they die when traditional approaches fail against threats they weren't designed to handle." "Trust is a risk, but so is isolation." The room fell silent again. Each commander was weighing not just tactical considerations, but the broader implications of what they were being asked to do. This wasn't just about one mission. It was about fundamentally changing how galactic military forces approached cooperation. "There is precedent," the Threnari cluster announced suddenly, their harmony shifting to indicate surprise. Analysis of galactic military history reveals 17 instances where interspecies cooperation exceeded predicted effectiveness levels. Common factors include crisis situations, unprecedented threats, and command structures based on capability rather than hierarchy. 17 successful examples in over 3,000 years of recorded galactic warfare, Nilvex calculated. "Statistical significance is marginal, but existence is confirmed," the Threnari replied. "Precedent indicates possibility." Chen felt a spark of hope. If there was historical precedent, even minimal, it meant that what they were attempting wasn't completely impossible. "So," she said, looking around the room at faces and forms that represented the military leadership of 5 different species, "are we willing to try becoming the 18th example?" The responses came slowly, each commander considering not just tactical implications, but the broader precedent they would be setting. "The Korthak War Council values effectiveness above tradition," Declan declared. "If cooperation proves more effective than isolation, cooperation will be embraced." "The Zephyrian flotilla accepts the challenge," Zixana announced, her colors shifting to the deep purples of commitment. "Our ancestors were explorers before they were warriors. Perhaps it is time to explore new ways of fighting." "The Crystalline Collective calculates acceptable probability ratios," Nilvex said formally. "Participation is approved. Our hive clusters will adapt," the Threnari cluster harmonized. "Collective intelligence includes the capacity for collective learning." Chen nodded, feeling the weight of history settling on her shoulders. Then let's begin with the basics. How do we communicate effectively during combat when each species processes information differently? For the next 6 hours, as the combined fleet traveled toward the edge of known space, 5 species worked together to solve problems none of them had ever faced before. They developed communication protocols that could function across different cognitive architectures. They designed formation patterns that maximized each species' strengths while minimizing their vulnerabilities. They created decision-making frameworks that allowed for rapid adaptation without abandoning coordination. It wasn't easy. There were moments when fundamental differences in tactical philosophy seemed insurmountable. Times when translation difficulties created dangerous misunderstandings. Instances when species pride threatened to derail the entire process. But gradually, something unprecedented began to emerge. Not a human fleet with alien allies, or alien forces with human coordination, but something entirely new, a truly integrated multi-species military unit. As they approached the edge of the system where the last communication had been received, Chen felt cautiously optimistic. They had created something that had never existed before in galactic history. Whether it would be enough to face what waited for them in the darkness between the stars remained to be seen. The first sign that something was fundamentally wrong came from the crystalline sensor arrays. Coordinate Prime Neilvex's harmonic voice carried undertones of confusion that Chen had never heard before. Uncertainty from a species whose entire existence was built on mathematical certainty. Captain Chen, we are detecting gravitational anomalies that should not exist according to known physics. Multiple massive objects occupying the same spatial coordinates without interaction. The main display showed the target system, but the readings were impossible to interpret using conventional understanding. Objects that registered as solid matter were simultaneously showing as empty space. Energy signatures that indicated massive power generation were coming from areas where sensors detected nothing at all. Zephyrian scouts report similar confusion, added Lieutenant Commander Parks. They're detecting movement patterns, but the movement appears to be occurring in dimensions we don't have sensors for. Chen felt the familiar chill that came with encountering something completely outside human experience. But this was different. It wasn't just beyond human understanding. It was beyond the understanding of species with centuries more technological development. All ships reduce speed to 1/4 impulse, she ordered. We approach carefully until we know what we're dealing with. On the tactical display, the combined fleet adjusted course in perfect coordination. The hours of preparation were already paying off. Korthak heavy cruisers moving to defensive positions while Zephyrian scouts extended their reconnaissance perimeter, all guided by crystalline computational analysis and coordinated through Thrunari communication networks. Contact from Commander Theklan, Parks announced. He's requesting permission to charge weapon systems. Chen considered the request. Korthak military doctrine emphasized overwhelming force as the solution to uncertainty. Under normal circumstances, it was probably the right approach, but nothing about this situation was normal. Negative on weapons charging, she decided. We still don't know if what we're facing is a threat or just something we don't understand. The response from the Korthak vessel was immediate. Human caution may prove fatal if delay allows enemy first strike advantage. Before Chen could respond, Zixana's voice came through on the Zephyrian communication channel. Scout leader concurs with human assessment. Unknown does not automatically indicate hostile. Crystalline analysis supports information gathering before commitment to hostile interpretation, added Neilvex. Trinary coordination protocols require threat confirmation before weapons activation, the insectoid harmony confirmed. Chen felt a moment of surprise. The alien commanders were supporting her decision not because they were following human leadership, but because her tactical choice aligned with their own species' strategic thinking. For the first time, they were genuinely thinking as a coordinated force rather than separate entities. Maintain current formation, she ordered. All sensors on maximum sensitivity. Whatever we're looking at, I want to understand it before we make any assumptions about it. The next few minutes passed in tense silence as the fleet approached the edge of the system. The sensor readings grew more confusing rather than clearer. Objects that appeared to be massive starships flickered in and out of existence. Energy patterns that suggested weapon systems kept changing configuration in ways that should have been impossible. Captain, Parks called softly, you need to see this. The main display shifted to show visual imaging from the Zephyrian scouts. What they saw defied immediate comprehension. Structures that looked like starships hung in space, but they were wrong in ways that hurt to look at. They had the general configuration of vessels designed for space travel, but their geometries were impossible. Surfaces that should have been flat curved in directions that existed but couldn't be perceived properly. Hulls that reflected light while simultaneously appearing transparent. How many of them are there? Chen asked, though she wasn't sure the question had meaning when applied to objects that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. Uncertain, replied Nivelex, their crystalline form flickering with computational strain. Visual count suggests 47 discrete vessels. Gravitational analysis indicates 12. Energy signatures show 93. Mass readings indicate negative numbers. The Threnari cluster was buzzing in harmonics that the translation systems couldn't process properly. Finally, they managed to produce coherent speech. Collective cannot process data. Entities exist outside hive mind comprehension parameters. Chen stared at the impossible formations hanging in space ahead of them. Every instinct developed through years of military service was screaming that this was a trap, that they were facing something that would destroy them before they could react. But another part of her mind, the part trained for first contact situations, was recognizing patterns. They're not attacking, she said suddenly. Explain, requested Theklan, his battle-scarred voice carrying skeptical concern. Whatever these things are, they've been sitting here for hours since the monitoring station went silent. They know we're approaching. Our sensor sweeps have to be detectable if they have any kind of technology at all, but they're not moving to intercept us, they're not powering weapons, they're not even acknowledging our presence. Perhaps they consider us beneath notice, suggested Zixana, her color shifting to the pale blues of uncertainty. The monitoring stations offered no resistance because resistance was irrelevant. Or perhaps, said Neilvex thoughtfully, they are waiting for something. The pattern of their advance suggests systematic exploration, but systematic for what purpose? Chen studied the tactical display, trying to think beyond conventional military doctrine. If these entities weren't hostile, if they were exploratory, then their behavior might make sense from a completely different perspective. What if they're not invaders? She said slowly. What if they're researchers? The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge to everything the galactic species understood about territorial expansion and military threat assessment. Researchers who silence communication systems? Theklone's skepticism was evident. Researchers who neutralize monitoring stations? Maybe they didn't silence anything, Chen replied, her mind working through the implications. Maybe they tried to communicate and the monitoring stations couldn't process the attempt. What if the communication failure wasn't because the stations were destroyed, but because contact was attempted using methods the stations weren't equipped to handle? The possibility rippled through the combined fleet's command structure. Each species began reanalyzing their sensor data through this new framework. Zephyrian analysis confirms no debris fields in any affected system, Zixana reported. No evidence of weapons fire or structural damage. Crystalline computational review indicates power systems in monitoring stations showed overload patterns consistent with information processing beyond design parameters, Neilvex added. Threnari coordination networks detect communication attempts in previously unrecognized frequency ranges. The insectoid cluster harmonized. Patterns suggest language structure, but language based on concepts outside collective experience. Chen felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to fit together. What if we're looking at first contact, but first contact with something so different from us that we can't recognize it as communication? A dangerous assumption, the Klon warned. Military doctrine requires preparation for worst-case scenarios. Agreed, Chen said, but it also requires accurate threat assessment. If we're wrong about the nature of this contact, our response could determine whether it becomes hostile. She activated the fleet-wide communications system. All vessels maintain defensive readiness but do not target the unknown entities. We're going to attempt communication. Captain, Park said quietly, how do we communicate with something that exists in dimensions we can't perceive using concepts we don't understand? It was a fair question, and one that highlighted the fundamental challenge of truly alien contact. Everything humanity knew about communication was based on the assumption of shared sensory experience and logical frameworks. But what if those assumptions were completely wrong?
We start with the universal language, Chen replied.
Mathematics. She turned to her communications officer. Begin broadcasting prime number sequences, simple mathematical progressions, basic geometric relationships. If there's intelligence there, mathematics should be recognizable regardless of sensory differences. Aye, Captain. Broadcasting mathematical sequences across all known frequency ranges. The minutes that followed stretched with tension as the fleet watched for any response from the impossible vessels. The entities remained motionless, their geometries continuing to shift in ways that made observation difficult. "Contact!" Parks announced suddenly. "We're receiving a response." The main display filled with patterns that were clearly artificial but unlike anything in any species database. Complex mathematical relationships that seemed to incorporate more variables than should be possible. Geometric progressions that included spatial dimensions beyond normal three-dimensional physics. "Can we decode it?" Chen asked. "Not with standard translation protocols," Parks replied. "But the patterns are consistent. It's definitely an attempt at communication. Neil Vex's crystalline form was pulsing with computational activity. Analysis suggests the mathematical relationships incorporate spatial concepts beyond conventional dimensional physics, but the underlying logic is recognizable." "What are they trying to tell us?" Chen asked, uncertain. "But the complexity is increasing with each transmission. They appear to be testing our comprehension level." Chen made a decision that would have horrified the Galactic Council if they'd known about it. Respond with our most advanced mathematical concepts. Show them what we're capable of understanding. Working together for the first time as a truly integrated unit, the 5 species began constructing a mathematical dialogue with entities that existed partially outside normal spacetime. Crystalline computational power processed impossible geometric relationships. Korthak tactical analysis identified pattern structures, Zephyrian artistic sensibilities, recognized aesthetic elements in the mathematical progressions. Thrinari collective intelligence managed the coordination of multiple simultaneous communication streams. Human adaptability tied everything together into coherent responses. Gradually, something remarkable began to emerge. Not translation in any conventional sense, but a growing understanding of mutual recognition. The entities were clearly intelligent, clearly curious, and clearly trying to establish meaningful contact. They're explorers, Chen realized. They're exploring our dimensional space the same way we explore planets. The monitoring stations weren't attacked. They were examined. "Examined to what purpose?" Theclon demanded. Before Chen could respond, the communication pattern suddenly changed. Instead of mathematical progressions, the entities began transmitting something that looked like star charts. But star charts that showed space from perspectives that shouldn't be possible. Views that incorporated time as well as space, that displayed gravitational relationships as visible structures. "They're showing us how they see our galaxy," Zixana breathed, her colors cycling through the full spectrum of amazement. The star charts were beautiful beyond description, showing the universe as a living, interconnected web of relationships rather than isolated points of light in empty space. But they were also terrifying in their implications. "This is how they perceive space," Neil Vex observed. "Then their technology operates on principles we cannot currently comprehend. Which makes them either the greatest opportunity for advancement in galactic history," Chen said quietly, "or the greatest threat." The communication patterns shifted again. This time the entities were showing them something that looked like a countdown. Complex mathematical sequences that were clearly decreasing towards some kind of conclusion. "Time limit?" Park suggested. "Or invitation," Chen replied. "Maybe they're telling us how long they'll remain here before moving on." The implications were staggering. First contact with entities that could revolutionize understanding of physics and space travel. But contact that would be lost if they couldn't establish meaningful communication within the specified time frame. "Captain!" The Klon's voice carried unusual urgency. "Korthak sensors detect energy buildup in the unknown vessels. Massive power generation beginning across all detected entities." Chen felt her heart rate spike. Were they preparing to leave, or preparing to defend themselves against what they might perceive as a threat? "All vessels, stand down weapons," she ordered immediately. "Continue broadcasting peaceful intentions." "Energy levels approaching critical thresholds," Nilvex reported. "Power generation exceeds anything in galactic database. The impossible vessels began to change." Their already strange geometries became even more complex, surfaces folding through dimensions that human perception couldn't properly process. The energy buildup was visible now as coherent patterns of light that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. "They're preparing to leave," Chen realized. "They've finished their examination of this area and they're moving on. Should we follow them?" Zixana asked, her colors showing the pale greens of desperate curiosity. "In ships designed for 3-dimensional physics?" Chen shook her head. "We couldn't follow them if we tried. But as the entities prepared to depart, they transmitted one final communication burst. This time, it wasn't mathematics or star charts. It was something that looked like coordinates, locations throughout the galaxy where they could be contacted again. "They're giving us a way to find them," Park said in amazement. Or they're giving us a warning about where they'll be next, Theclon countered, his military mind still focused on threat assessment. The entities began to fade from normal space-time, their impossible geometries becoming even more impossible before disappearing entirely. Within minutes, the system was empty except for the combined galactic fleet and the monitoring station that was still exactly where it should be, completely undamaged. "Scan the monitoring station," Chen ordered. "I want to know why it stopped transmitting." The results were both simple and profound. The station's communication systems had been overloaded not by attack but by an attempt to process information transmitted in formats they weren't designed to handle. The station had essentially suffered a massive system crash when the entities tried to communicate with it. They were trying to make contact from the beginning, Chen realized. Every station that went silent was a failed communication attempt. "Which means," Zixana said slowly, "that we just accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history." "What's that?" Chen asked. "Successful first contact with truly alien intelligence," Nilvex replied. "Intelligence so different from any galactic species that communication required entirely new approaches." As the fleet began the journey back to Council space, Chen reflected on what they had achieved. 5 species that had started the mission doubting each other's capabilities had ended it functioning as a single coordinated unit. They had faced something completely outside their combined experience and found a way to respond effectively. But more than that, they had demonstrated that when faced with the truly unknown, the galaxy's strength lay not in any individual species' capabilities, but in their ability to combine different perspectives into something greater than the sum of their parts. But those contacts would require the same kind of unprecedented cooperation they had just demonstrated. As they traveled toward home, Chen couldn't shake the feeling that they had just taken the first step into a much larger universe than any of them had imagined. A universe where humanity's greatest contribution might not be their weapons or their technology, but their strange talent for making impossible alliances work against impossible odds. The journey back to Council space should have been a victory celebration. They had achieved successful first contact with entities that represented a quantum leap in understanding of physics and dimensional space. The 5 species had demonstrated unprecedented cooperation under pressure. No lives had been lost, no vessels damaged, no systems threatened. Instead, the trip became 48 hours of increasingly tense debate about what they had actually accomplished. "We allowed unknown entities to examine our technology and defensive capabilities without obtaining any meaningful intelligence about their intentions," Commander Theclon argued during the 3rd emergency joint briefing. His scarred carapace reflected the conference room's lighting and harsh angles, emphasizing his displeasure. "We established communication with intelligence that could revolutionize galactic understanding of dimensional physics," countered Coordinate Prime Nilvex, their crystalline form pulsing with computational intensity. "The mathematical concepts they shared represent advances beyond our current theoretical frameworks. Advances that could be used as weapons," Zixana pointed out, her colors cycling through the orange-reds of concern. "If these entities understand space-time manipulation to the degree their transmissions suggest, they could potentially destabilize entire star systems." The Threnari coordination cluster buzzed in harmonics that the translation systems struggled to process. Finally, they managed coherent speech. "Collective analysis indicates entities demonstrated restraint rather than capability. Power generation levels detected could have disabled all fleet vessels simultaneously, yet no hostile actions were taken." Captain Chen listened to the familiar pattern emerging. Each species was interpreting the contact through the lens of their own cultural priorities and military doctrines. The cooperation that had functioned perfectly during the crisis was fragmenting as the immediate threat disappeared. "The question we're avoiding," Chen said finally, "is whether the success of this mission changes anything about how our species work together, or if this was just a temporary alliance that ends now that the immediate crisis is over." The conference room fell silent. It was the question everyone had been thinking, but no one wanted to address directly. "Human curiosity is noted," Theclon rumbled. "But Korthak military doctrine requires preparation for worst-case scenarios. These entities now possess detailed knowledge of our fleet capabilities, our communication methods, and our defensive strategies." "They also provided coordinates for future contact," Chen replied. "That's not typical behavior for entities planning hostile action. Or it's exactly the behavior we should expect from entities conducting reconnaissance for future invasion," the Klon countered. Nilvex's form refracted light in patterns that indicated deep computational analysis. "Probability calculations suggest both interpretations contain logical validity. However, the mathematical concepts they shared represent genuine knowledge transfer, not deception." "Assuming we interpreted their transmissions correctly," Zixana added, "what if what we perceived as mathematical communication was actually something completely different? Collective analysis confirms mathematical accuracy, the Threnari cluster harmonized. Concepts transmitted follow logical progressions regardless of interpretation framework. Chen watched the debate continue and realized they were facing a fundamental challenge that went beyond the immediate question of the mysterious entities. The 5 species had functioned as a unified force when facing the unknown, but now they were reverting to their traditional patterns of mutual suspicion and defensive thinking. "Stop," she said quietly. The conversation continued, each species defending their interpretation of events. "Stop," she repeated, louder this time. Gradually, the debate died down, leaving the conference room in an uncomfortable silence. "We're doing exactly what we always do," Chen observed. "We're looking for reasons to distrust each other instead of focusing on what we accomplish together. Human assessment may be accurate," Theclon admitted grudgingly, "but caution remains necessary when dealing with unknown factors." "I agree," Chen said, surprising everyone in the room. "But caution about what exactly?" She activated the conference room's display, showing recordings from their encounter with the entities. "Are we being cautious about alien intentions, or are we being cautious about trusting each other?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Each commander could see the same pattern Chen was highlighting. Their immediate response to uncertainty was to question their allies rather than focus on external threats. "Perhaps both concerns are valid," Nilvex suggested diplomatically. "Perhaps," Chen agreed, "but let's consider what each type of caution leads to." She modified the display to show tactical analysis of their recent mission. When we focused on being cautious about each other, we initially planned separate reconnaissance missions using different approaches. The result would have been 5 different species encountering something completely outside our understanding, each trying to interpret it through our individual frameworks. The display shifted to show what had actually happened. When we focused on being cautious about external threats while trusting each other's capabilities, we were able to establish communication with entities that none of us could have contacted individually. Zixana's colors shifted to contemplative purples. The human analysis suggests that internal trust enables external effectiveness. More than that, Chen replied, it suggests that some challenges require capabilities that no single species possesses. If we're going to explore the coordinates these entities provided, if we're going to advance galactic understanding of dimensional physics, if we're going to prepare for future contact with truly alien intelligence, we need the cooperation we demonstrated during this mission to become standard practice, not a temporary emergency measure. Theclon's mandibles clicked in the pattern Chen had learned indicated serious consideration. Human proposal implies fundamental changes to galactic military doctrine. Interspecies cooperation is primary strategy rather than crisis-driven exception.
"I'm implying more than that," Chen said.
"I'm implying that the universe is bigger and stranger than any of our species understood individually. And if we're going to thrive in that universe rather than just survive in it, we need to get better at combining our strengths instead of protecting ourselves from each other's weaknesses." The Threnari cluster hummed in harmonics that suggested intense collective processing. Finally, they spoke in unison. Collective analysis indicates human proposal represents evolutionary advancement in galactic cooperation paradigm. Evolution requires adaptation to changing circumstances, Nilvex observed. Current circumstances include contact with intelligence that operates outside conventional parameters. And future circumstances, Chen added, will likely include more contact with intelligence types we haven't encountered yet. Each contact will require the same kind of adaptive cooperation we demonstrated here. Zixana's colors shifted to the deep blues of serious commitment. Zephyrian analysis concurs with human assessment. Traditional isolation strategies appear inadequate for current galactic conditions. The shift in the conversation was subtle but significant. Instead of debating whether their cooperation had been successful, they were now discussing whether that cooperation should become a permanent arrangement. Such changes would require approval from highest government levels, Theclon pointed out. Military commanders cannot unilaterally restructure galactic defense doctrine. No, Chen agreed. But we can make recommendations based on operational experience. And our operational experience suggests that integrated multi-species forces are more effective than traditional alliance structures. Recommendation would carry more weight with supporting evidence, Nilvex noted practically. The coordinates? Chen realized. The entities gave us multiple contact points throughout the galaxy. If we could demonstrate successful communication at additional sites using the same cooperative approaches, multiple successful contacts would provide statistical basis for policy recommendations, the Threnary cluster harmonized with growing excitement. And, added Zixana, each contact would advance galactic understanding of dimensional physics and extranormal intelligence. Chen felt the familiar surge of possibility that came with recognizing a solution to seemingly impossible problems. We could propose an extended joint mission. Multiple contact attempts using integrated force structures. Scientific advancement combined with military doctrine evolution. Ambitious, Theclon rumbled. Perhaps excessively so. Perhaps, Chen agreed. But consider the alternative. We return to Council space, file individual reports through separate command structures, and watch as our species spend the next 6 months debating whether cooperation is worth the risk. Meanwhile, the entities continue their exploration according to schedules we don't understand, and we lose the opportunity for continued contact. The tactical implications were clear to everyone in the room. Window of opportunity was limited, and traditional bureaucratic processes might close it permanently. What specific proposal would you make? Nivelex asked, their computational processes clearly analyzing possibilities. Joint Task Force, Chen replied. Permanent assignment for mixed crews on integrated vessels. Mandate to investigate all provided coordinates and establish ongoing communication protocols with extra-normal intelligence. Command structure? Theclon asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Rotating based on mission requirements and species expertise. No permanent hierarchy, but adaptive leadership depending on specific challenges. The concept was radical by galactic standards. Military forces traditionally maintained rigid command structures based on species loyalty and established doctrine. What Chen was proposing would require officers to take orders from alien commanders based purely on tactical necessity. Personnel would need extensive cross-cultural training, Zixana observed. Officers capable of functioning effectively under alien command authority. Training programs could be developed, the Threnary cluster noted. Collective learning protocols adapted for individual consciousness modification. Technological integration would require significant research investment, Nilvex added. Standardized systems compatible with all species equipment. All solvable problems, Chen said, if there's will to solve them. The real question wasn't about logistics or training or technology. The real question was whether 5 species that had spent centuries maintaining careful distance from each other were willing to commit to genuine integration. The council session is in 18 hours, Thicklon noted. If such a proposal is to be made, preparation must begin immediately. Are we agreed on making the proposal? Chen asked, looking around the room at faces and forms that represented 5 different approaches to existence itself. The Korthik War Council values effectiveness above tradition, Theclon declared. If integration proves more effective than separation, integration will be supported. The Crystalline Collective calculates significant probability of advancement through continued cooperation, Nilvex affirmed. The Zephyrian Flotilla embraces the challenge of permanent exploration partnership, Zixana announced, her colors shifting to the bright golds of adventure. Our hive clusters accept integration as evolutionary necessity, the Threnary cluster harmonized. Chen nodded, feeling the weight of history settling on her shoulders once again. They were about to propose something that would fundamentally change the nature of galactic civilization. Not just military cooperation, but genuine integration of different species' strengths into something entirely new. Then let's prepare a presentation that will convince the Council that the universe just got bigger, and we need to get better at exploring it together. As the commanders dispersed to work on their proposal, Chen remained in the conference room for a few minutes, studying the star charts that showed the coordinates provided by the entities. Each location represented an opportunity for advancement, for understanding, for contact with intelligence that could revolutionize everything they knew about existence itself. But more than that, each location represented a test of whether the cooperation they had achieved could survive bureaucracy, politics, and the natural tendency of civilized species to retreat into comfortable isolation when faced with the truly unknown. In 18 hours, they would find out whether the galaxy was ready to take the next step in its evolution, or whether fear would triumph over possibility once again. Either way, Chen was certain of one thing. Humanity's role in galactic civilization would never be the same. They had proven that sometimes the newest members of a community were exactly what that community needed to face its greatest challenges. Now they just had to convince everyone else that the greatest challenges were also the greatest opportunities. The Galactic Council chamber had never hosted a presentation like the one that unfolded 18 hours later. For the first time in recorded history, 5 species stood together at a single podium, presenting unified recommendations rather than competing proposals. Ambassador Chenwei watched the assembled delegates as Commander Thecalon displayed tactical analysis of their encounter with the entities. The massive Korthax-scarred carapace caught the chamber's lights as he described weapon signatures that exceeded anything in galactic databases, yet had been used with restraint rather than aggression. The entities demonstrated technological capabilities that could have destroyed our entire fleet, Thecalon reported matter-of-factly. Instead, they engaged in mathematical communication that resulted in knowledge transfer unprecedented in galactic history. Coordinate Prime, Milovex took the presentation next, their crystalline form refracting light into complex patterns as they shared the mathematical concepts received from the entities. The implications rippled through the chamber as species scientific advisors processed theoretical frameworks that could revolutionize understanding of dimensional physics. Analysis confirms genuine advancement opportunities, Nilvex stated. However, continued contact requires cooperative approaches that exceed current interspecies capabilities. Flight leader Zix Izana's presentation focused on the exploration implications, her colors shifting through spectrums that emphasize the magnitude of discovery. The entities provided coordinates to 17 additional contact points throughout galactic space. Each represents potential for contact with intelligence types we have never encountered. The Threnary Coordination Cluster harmonized their report on communication protocols, demonstrating how different species' cognitive approaches had been combined to achieve successful contact. Collective analysis confirms that no single species possessed sufficient conceptual frameworks for communication. Success required integration of multiple consciousness types. Finally, Chen stepped forward to present the recommendation that would either transform galactic civilization or be dismissed as human idealism. Esteemed colleagues, she began. 3 days ago, we faced a crisis that challenged every assumption about galactic defense and interspecies cooperation. Today we have the opportunity to transform that crisis into the foundation for a new era of exploration and advancement. The chamber was silent except for the soft hum of translation systems processing her words into 17 different language frameworks. The entities we encountered represent the first confirmed contact with intelligence operating outside conventional dimensional physics. They are explorers, researchers, beings whose understanding of space-time could revolutionize every aspect of galactic civilization. But they are not the only such intelligence we are likely to encounter. Chen activated the holographic display, showing star charts that map the coordinates provided by the entities. The universe is vast, and we have explored only a fraction of it. As our expansion continues, we will inevitably encounter other intelligence types that challenge our understanding of existence itself. The question is whether we will meet those encounters as separate species competing for advantage, or as a unified galactic community prepared to adapt and learn. The human delegation proposes something unprecedented, she continued. A permanent joint task force composed of integrated crews from all willing species with a mandate to establish contact protocols for extranormal intelligence and advance galactic understanding of non-conventional physics. The reaction was immediate. Several delegations erupted in concerned discussion, while others leaned forward with obvious interest. The proposal challenged fundamental assumptions about how galactic civilization organized itself. The scope of what you propose, said Princess Nala of the Veilani Consortium, her serpentine form coiled in patterns that suggested deep consideration, would require unprecedented levels of interspecies trust and cooperation. Yes, Chen agreed simply. It would? And if that trust proves misplaced? Asked General Zorek of the Hegemony Defense Forces. If species find themselves compromised by sharing sensitive military information, then we adapt, Chen replied. The same way we adapted when faced with entities that existed partially outside normal space-time, the same way we will need to adapt when we encounter the next intelligence type that operates according to principles we don't currently understand. High Counselor Vexstar's crystalline form cast prismatic reflections throughout the chamber as they processed the proposal through crystalline computational matrices. The mathematical analysis provided by the entities suggests the existence of dimensional structures that could enable faster-than-light travel without conventional hyperspace technology. The implications for galactic expansion are significant, as are the implications for galactic security, pointed out Commander Jektar of the Outer Rim Defense Coalition. These entities demonstrated the ability to neutralize our monitoring systems without triggering defensive protocols. What happens when we encounter intelligence that is less benign? It was the question Chen had been expecting, and the one that struck at the heart of galactic civilization's fundamental challenge. Every species had evolved defensive thinking that prioritized protection from external threats over adaptation to new circumstances. That's exactly why we need the kind of cooperation we demonstrated during first contact, Chen replied. Not because it guarantees safety, but because it maximizes our ability to respond effectively to whatever we encounter. She modified the display to show comparative analysis of different response scenarios. If each species encounters unknown intelligence individually, using separate protocols and isolated decision-making, the result is 17 different responses to the same phenomenon. Some might be successful, others might fail catastrophically, but the failures would provide no learning opportunities for the successes. If we encounter unknown intelligence as a unified force, using integrated protocols and coordinated decision-making, the result is a single response that incorporates the strengths of all participating species. Failure becomes a learning opportunity for improvement, and success becomes a foundation for advancement. The logic was compelling, but Chen could see that logic alone wouldn't be sufficient. The proposal challenged too many established patterns of thinking. Perhaps, she said quietly, a demonstration would be more convincing than analysis. She activated her personal communicator. Captain Rodriguez, please patch us through to the task force. The Chamber's communication systems connected to the fleet that was currently investigating the first set of coordinates provided by the entities. The tactical display filled with real-time data from a joint operation involving 6 different species working together to establish contact with entities at the edge of galactic space. Task Force Harmony reporting, came Captain Rodriguez's voice. We've achieved successful contact with intelligence type designated Echo 7. Communication established using protocols developed during the original encounter. Entities appear to be conducting systematic exploration of galactic structures, similar to first contact. No hostile actions detected. The chamber buzzed with translated discussions as delegates processed the implications. The joint task force was already functional, already achieving results that would have been impossible through traditional separate operations. Request permission to implement Protocol 7, Rodriguez continued. Entities are indicating willingness to share advanced computational matrices with galactic forces. Chen looked around the chamber, seeing the moment of decision reflected in hundreds of eyes and sensory organs. The future of galactic civilization hung in the balance, waiting for species that had spent centuries maintaining careful distance to commit to genuine integration. Permission granted, she replied, then addressed the chamber. Ladies, gentlemen, and esteemed colleagues of all species, you are witnessing the first successful implementation of integrated interspecies cooperation protocols for contact with extra-normal intelligence. The demonstration continued for 20 minutes, showing how the task force navigated complex communication challenges, adapted to unexpected entity behaviors, and successfully established ongoing dialogue with intelligence that operated according to principles none of them had encountered before. When the connection closed, the chamber was silent for long moments. The results appear promising, admitted General Zorak, though his tone suggested reluctance to acknowledge the success. More than promising, corrected High Counselor Vextar. They represent evolutionary advancement in galactic capability. The question, said Princess Nala thoughtfully, is whether such advancement justifies the risks of unprecedented cooperation. Chen had prepared for this moment the point where fear of change would challenge recognition of necessity. The question, she replied, is whether we believe galactic civilization is strong enough to embrace its next phase of development, or whether we believe our survival depends on maintaining the limitations that have defined our past. She paused, letting her words resonate throughout the chamber. 3 days ago, we faced something that challenged every assumption about galactic defense. We could have responded with traditional approaches, separate species pursuing separate agendas, competing for advantage, protecting ourselves from each other as much as from external threats. Instead, we chose to trust each other's strengths while acknowledging each other's limitations. The result was successful contact with intelligence that could revolutionize our understanding of physics, space travel, and existence itself. The chamber's lighting shifted to accommodate the various species' visual requirements as formal voting procedures began. Each delegation would need to reach internal consensus before casting their species' vote on the proposal. Chen watched the process with fascination and growing hope. Conversations that had begun with skeptical questions were evolving into practical discussions of implementation details. Species that had entered the chamber doubting the wisdom of increased cooperation were now debating how quickly joint training programs could be established. The Crystalline Collective was the first to announce their decision. Mathematical analysis confirmed superior probability ratios for advancement through integration versus continued separation. The Crystalline Collective supports the human proposal. The Zephyrian Flotilla followed quickly. Exploration is the essence of Zephyrian existence. The proposal represents the greatest exploration opportunity in galactic history. Zephyrian support is confirmed. The Threnari coordination clusters hummed in harmonics that built to crescendo before announcing. Collective analysis confirms evolutionary necessity. Threnari hive minds support integration protocols. The Korthak delegation's response carried the weight of military pragmatism. Effectiveness determines survival. Integration has proven effective. Korthak War Council supports proposal. One by one, species after species announced their support. Not enthusiastic endorsement in all cases, but recognition that the universe had become larger and stranger than their traditional approaches could handle. When the final vote was tallied, the result was unprecedented. Unanimous approval for the establishment of the Galactic Integration Initiative, with humanity designated as coordinating species for the first operational phase. As the session ended and delegates dispersed to begin implementation planning, Chen remained in the chamber, reflecting on what had just occurred. In less than a week, humanity had gone from being the newest members of galactic civilization to being the coordinators of its greatest evolutionary leap. Ambassador, High Counselor Vexstar approached her position, their crystalline form refracting the chamber's dimming lights and contemplative patterns. The crystalline collective wishes to express gratitude for human persistence in pursuit of cooperative advancement. Thank you, Chen replied. Though I should point out that this wasn't just human persistence. Every species contributed essential elements to our success. Perhaps, Vexstar agreed, but humans contributed something the rest of us had forgotten how to value. The absolute refusal to accept that different approaches cannot work together effectively. As Chen left the chamber to begin the complex process of implementing galactic integration, she carried with her a profound sense of possibility. The universe had revealed itself to be vast beyond imagination, filled with intelligence types that operated according to principles no single species could understand alone. But they wouldn't be facing that universe alone. For the first time in galactic history, different species would be exploring it together, combining their strengths while supporting each other's limitations. The entities had provided coordinates to 17 contact points. Each would be an opportunity to advance understanding, to learn new approaches to existence itself, to demonstrate that the galaxy's strength lay not in any individual species' capabilities, but in their willingness to combine different perspectives into something greater than the sum of their parts. Humanity's role in galactic civilization had been permanently transformed. They were no longer the primitive newcomers relying on more advanced species for guidance. They had become the glue that held an unprecedented alliance together, the species that,